Welcome back to another episode of the Wet Dreamz Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Gonzalez. I'm a mental health counselor, and I'm also a sex therapist who deals with primarily men with out of control sexual behavior and couples.
I'm Dr. Brad Hinman. I'm a licensed professional counselor, licensed marriage and family therapist, and a certified sex therapist.
Yeah, today we're going to talk again about pregnancy. We have another pregnancy episode that we've done. But it's a little bit of a different frame this time around. I've had the conversation a lot lately with like some friends and even some clients and stuff like that. And maybe the age of life I am in right now. A lot of my friends are having babies and stuff. But this conversation about like preparing for fatherhood and the kind of struggle of the pregnancy process in the sense of, you know, what's my role as a dad, you know, and like thinking about financial issues for the future and stuff like that. Just like it felt, I also felt like that in my kids were being born and pregnant and all that. It felt like you want to be there for your partner, and it's invariably you kind of get left out in the process, you know, by no fault of anyone, but dads are kind of forgotten. So I just wanted to put a spotlight and give a shout out to the dads that are maybe going through this or thinking about it in the future. I think this is an important conversation. For sure. So how do you remember how you felt when your kids were it wasn't that long ago, of course. I know you're not that old.
I remember being, I guess, nervous, right? Like, it was like the first time you have kids, it's the first time. So you've not done it before, right? So it's new. And so of course I read books about what it was like. And so, but then humans don't make good book chapters. And so my wife wasn't following exactly what the book said. So, it is confusing. It's overwhelming. Like I feel like it's natural to have a feeling of like, are we ready? We're not ready. I don't, what are we going to do if the baby does this or X, Y, or Z or whatever? If you wait until you're ready, you're never going to have kids. So
you're never ready.
Right.
Definitely. Yeah, same. I think, just the unknown of it, I think invariably, I remember, I don't know, there was definitely an excitement. And I remember one of the random funny stories was it took us a little while to get pregnant. I think it was about a year. So, initially I'm like, I want a boy, of course, that whole stereotypical thing. But then at the point that we were actually gonna get pregnant, it was like, oh, I don't care. At this point, just give me a kid, Yeah. And I remember going to the ultrasound for like the gender reveal at like 20 weeks with my wife, and they were like said it was a boy, and we like high-fived each other, like, I don't know, across the ultrasound person, I don't know, like in their face, and then I promptly deleted all the girls' names that we had written in our phone. So we had the boys' names on one eye and the girls' names on. So it was just like super exciting to have a boy, It's just funny. Like I didn't care, but then when the time came, I was like, oh, that's exciting. You know what I mean? So there's definitely that excitement and that, some anxiety and some like you said, the unknown. I think that's a big part of it. Like what's gonna happen, and you don't fully know until you know.
Yeah, that's true. There are that's true for a lot of things with having a baby. It's with our first one we knew that we were having a boy, but the second one, it was too early to tell with his first ultrasound and too late with his second ultrasound.
Oh, that's funny.
There wasn't enough room in there to to figure it out.
So you didn't know till he was born. Oh, dang, that's crazy.
We might have known. I don't know. I'd have to ask my wife.
Right.
I don't think we knew until right up until the end, maybe, or something.
Dang. Well, you had all the boy stuff, which was nice.
Yep.
For the first one. Yeah, exactly. For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it's like a mixed bag in the beginning, the initial feelings of excitement, but then some anxiety, or whether it be, I mean, I personally have never been a financial provider. That sounds bad. I've never been a financial provider, but that's not anything that's in my brain. But I know a lot of guys, a lot of dads, kind of that comes early. Like oh, I have to provide for a baby and for another kid. Like oh, the finances and all that stuff. So that could be a big burden, big anxiety producing thing for guys specifically.
Yeah, it does seem like guys worry about the finance part of having a baby more than the females that I've known or have heard about. So they're not only worried about is the baby going to be healthy and what are we supposed to do if the baby does XYZ, but they're also worried about financially providing for the family, which then also then kind of feeds into, because the male is traditionally focused, like we're saying, on the financial providing. There's this kind of emotional pulling away of childcare and nurturing, and kind of, the dad kind of pulls away from that and isn't as, and of course there's tons of exceptions for this, but the fathers tend to not be as involved with child rearing as what the female is.
Valid in some ways of like, I think that tends to be guys' mentality of like, okay, well, there's this objective that needs to be completed, or let me make as much as I can or save as much as whatever for this financial burden that's coming. So I'm like one track, one mind focused. Like I'm just gonna do that and work overtime and like pick up other whatever and do whatever I can, sell things.
Yep.
That tends to be that mentality, and then the other part of nurturing, or your spouse is hormonal and needs a hug or whatever, or needs you to get pickles in the middle of the, I don't know, whatever, like that kind of stuff can tend to be pushed off a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's kind of a self-perpetuating kind of thing, right? Because the more you want to make more money, so you work more shifts, which takes you away from home more, right? So and then you're not there to change diapers. So
right. So do you feel like, it's kind of a random question, but when do you feel like guys neglect their emotional health? I mean, they do anyways in general, so that we understand that part of it. But at what point do you think in that process, like, are guys the most likely to, like, because I guess I'll explain. I think there's generally within pregnancy and as fathers, there's a general tendency to like, okay, I'm gonna push my stuff away because I have to be there for my wife. I have to be there for my kids soon or whatever. I just wonder when that comes, when that happens the most. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah. When you first asked the question, I'm like 24/7, 365.
From birth.
They ignore their emotions. But I also think that definitely I feel like when the baby is born, like there's a switch that flips of basically the dads don't exist anymore. You're just there to, like, as a support or a financial provider, right? It can be very isolating. Very, if you're not conscious of it and you don't make an effort to still connect as a couple, it's hard. I get it with a newborn baby, right? But your relationship is still your relationship, even with kids. And it's good to talk about while you're pregnant or before you get pregnant of what your relationship's going to look like after the baby comes. But to answer your question, I definitely think, I feel like in the hospital the day the baby is born,
right? It's like, shut off,
yep.
Shut off everything else.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think it's, it's primed before that process too. Like, it makes me think, like, for example, if it took long for you to get pregnant, you know, there's a little bit of that, being supportive to your spouse, whatever the issue is, you know what I mean? If it's you or the spouse, whatever, there's some level of neglecting your own stuff then, and then pregnancy comes and there's another layer, another level of neglecting your stuff because she's growing a human and she's whatever, feeling all the feelings, her body's changing. So then another layer of like putting your stuff to the side. And then for sure, I feel like that's the big culmination of like the baby's here. Now for sure, I don't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the framework of that is planted earlier on, right? Because, you know, in the first trimester, the woman might have morning sickness. And so you're trying to care for that. You're trying to help her, you know, hold her hair while she's puking. Like,
right.
You know,
right. You're being a good husband.
Yes. And so I think throughout the pregnancy, there's steps or signs or a progression of the diminishing of the man's needs, right? And you know, and then even with it, you know, if hopefully the morning sickness subsides, maybe after the first trimester, but then in the third trimester, she's so uncomfortable that you're there trying to comfort her that way too, you know?
Right.
Because she's got this whole human, you know, that's trying to get out.
Exactly.
And so there's definitely some discomfort there, and you're trying to, you know, buy all the things and get ready for the baby to come. And then, you know, there's a time period where you can't have sex, for her body to heal. And so again, you know, the male's needs, and I'm not, you know, we're not trying to say that it's all about the man and the woman doesn't matter.
Has it easy.
Yeah. We did a couple of episodes on the female, like the process of her going through that.
Yeah.
So we're just focused on the men now on this episode. So, you know, it is a gradual kind of progression of the man almost like disappearing right from the equation.
For sure. And you can see how, you know, obviously it's not an excuse, but you can see how guys will often withdraw in that time, or focus on work, or focus on the things they can control, or the things they can feel like they are contributing to, because so often in the process you're kind of helpless. You know, you can do your best and you can support, but it's really her going through it. It's happening to her body, and she's feeling the things more than you are. So it can be easy to feel helpless and just kind of withdraw, or just, you know, focus on other things that, like, okay, I know what work entails. I can do this, and then I get a result from it. I don't know what the heck I'm doing at home. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's another thing, like, that's another aspect of this, is that sometimes, you know, if this is your first baby, sometimes the man doesn't know what they're doing. You know, if the woman's first baby, she probably doesn't know what she's doing either. But there is, like, I think, a tendency with men of, I know how to work and I know how to earn money, so I'm going to do that because I don't know how to do this other thing. So I'm just going to, like, move away from that. And so that's another kind of natural tendency that people have. I think that, you know, like, because I mentioned, you know, that for like 6 weeks or so, you're not allowed, the doctor forbids sex, right, from happening. And we know that nobody ever breaks that rule, but
of course.
But I think it is important for us to point out that as sex and relationship therapists, that if the man already has a vulnerability towards sexually acting out, either through porn or infidelity, that not getting his needs met and not being able to talk and share about his emotions, that's going to lead him more in that area to be more susceptible to acting out.
Right.
And so, you know, as therapists, we need to, like, if we know a client is, you know, the partner is going to have a baby, talk about that. Like, what is your plan? What is your plan to remain sober during that time period?
Right. Because you have like a perfect set of circumstances to not be sober or whatever, you know, you're especially both like during pregnancy, but also then after the baby, perfect set of circumstances. You're lacking sleep, you're probably not having sex with your partner, you're not having date nights, you're not taking care of yourself emotionally, you're working on fumes, probably going to work. Like that's like the worst. You're not eating well, you know what I mean? All the conditions there
and
for
not
you
sleeping. Did you mention that?
Yep, double. Yeah, you're not sleeping. Did we mention that? It's like a perfect set of circumstances to have acting out or to, you know, and on top of that, I feel like too is like your partner's not mindful of you in the same way that they were before, because now they're trying to survive, plus they have a baby that's depending on them 100%, or like at least for food, but mostly 100%, so that your partner's not worried about you in that way, like you were before, you know, or checking in on you. Hey babe, how's your struggle going, or how's your stuff with porn going? That's not happening. You know,
right? Yeah, nobody has the energy to worry about that anymore,
right?
But it is something to be mindful of and to talk about and to create a plan for success, because otherwise it's going to be a miracle if you don't fall back to that coping mechanism.
Exactly, for sure. Have you, this is another random question, have you had guys that have navigated the pregnancy thing successfully? The opposite of probably. I mean,
like,
they're out there. They're out there. I'm just like being.
Are you talking specifically with sexual issues?
Yeah, with sexual issues and porn and yeah, for sure.
Like if they have enough, I keep thinking of the word scaffolding.
Yeah.
Right? Like if they have enough of the framework in place, enough of a plan, because I ask my clients often, whether it's, you know, vacations or holidays or Christmas break or whatever, like I say, what is your plan? What is your plan to be successful during this time? And so if they have a plan to be successful and they follow that plan, then yes, they can successfully navigate that. It is a time like childbirth and child rearing early on it can be a time of bonding for everybody, right? And so you can get your emotional needs met through all the bonding type things that you're doing. But it also can be a time of ignoring the man, and, you know, because the female's exhausted because she stayed up all night, you know, taking care of the baby, you know, waking every 2 hours or whatever it is. And, you know, that can be, you know, and I just mentioned earlier today, was talking to somebody, you know, like they're being touched all day long by their baby, you know, they're being, you know, child handled. It's not man handled, right? They're being child handled all day. And then if the man wants to have sex, and they're like, no, I've been puked on face all day. You know, I don't really want to be touched right now, you know? And so just talking as a couple and working out, what is supposed to happen during that time, so that everybody feels like their needs are being met, and no one's being ignored.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I certainly don't think the plan, and this is often the plan that guys have, but certainly the plan isn't just shut it off, like shut off my needs, or shut off, like just push through or whatever. That's often the plan that guys will have, like, I'm just gonna work a lot, or I'll just like distract myself all the time, whatever. Like, that's not the plan. I mean, you can do it, but it's not going to last long.
I'm really glad you said that, because I don't think we've talked about this next thing that I'm going to say during this podcast ever. It's never a good idea to just say, I'm just going to ignore my emotions and power through something. I know that that's probably what the, you know, successful people books say that to do in business or whatever, but I'm telling you as a therapist, it's never a good idea for you to ignore your emotions and just try to be successful without processing your emotions, because they're going to fester, they're going to get worse. It's going to drive you to make choices that are not healthy. Right? Whether that's staying up all night or not eating appropriately or whatever you're doing, or acting out sexually, if you process your emotions and you talk about your emotions, they will go away. If you don't, and if you just try to push them down, then they're going to get worse, right? Because they won't go away. We think they go away if we ignore them. No, they get stronger and worse.
Yep. I literally just had a session recently, like that the husband struggled with being sexually attracted to their wife from the jump, from the beginning of their relationship, and and just kind of pushed it aside. And 10 years down the line, it's like now they're at a point where they're close to ending the relationship. You know what I mean? Like it's like you just deferred it and deferred it and deferred it, and now it's a way bigger problem than it was if you would have talked about it within year one, you know, and worked through it and either continue the relationship with it open and feeling and figure out those feelings, or end the relationship at that time. Then it's better than 10 years later. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's the thought. Like, okay, I'll just focus on these other things. It's fine. It'll be fine. And it never is.
I don't know why humans have that tendency to like, if I ignore it, it'll go away. Like, that doesn't seem to work out very well.
Yeah, we all do it. It's insane for sure. So and that brings another point. I think it's also important at this time, especially pregnancy and especially early childhood. I think it's important for the guys to have other people that they're talking to, other dads, mentors, just other support systems, because while the part of the plan is expressing your emotions and dealing with your emotions, it may not always be with your wife. I mean, especially early on in those processes, like that might not be the person right now because she's going through her own stuff. So, and it shouldn't really be the person that you're depending on for everything anyways in the first place. But having other guys that's gone through it, having other dads or whatever, I think it's huge. But I think that's lacking in specifically other dads. At least in my experience, I found like you barely see other dads. Like I joke, I think I've said that with you. Like I'll go and pick up my kids, and there's just moms everywhere. Moms, which is fine, but I don't see many dads, and the dads aren't talking. The moms are talking about stuff like, hey, after school, blah blah blah. I'm not talking to any other dads like, hey, let's get our kids together. It doesn't happen. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think men in general kind of have this like, I can do it myself mentality, right? I don't need to ask for directions. I don't need to ask for help. But when puke is coming out your baby at 3:00 in the morning, like it's, you would probably would have rather talked to somebody about that ahead of time.
Yep, right.
Or the baby won't stop crying, or any number of 100 other problems that they can have. They always get sick at 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah. It's always 3:00 in the morning.
I think it's a great idea for young fathers to have a mentor, or somebody they can talk to that's gone through it, and for the other person to say this is normal, right? Like this is, because nothing's normal when you have a new baby and you've not ever had one before. But for somebody to be like, nope, that's supposed to happen. They all do that or whatever, I mean, I remember my oldest son was born with a full head of hair. I saw the hair before I saw anything else on his body. And then his hair fell out like 6 months later or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And bald. I'm like, he's going to be bald. Like, he's bald already.
Like, damn it, I'm sorry, kid.
Right. But then somebody said, no, that's normal for the, the baby hair, the prenatal hair or whatever to fall out. And then grow in, his regular hair comes in later or something. Right. I don't know. It's so weird.
Yeah, it is very weird.
But I remember panicking because I'm like, his hair is falling out. Does he have cancer or something?
Baby cancer.
Right? I was so freaked out.
That's hilarious.
So I think things like that would be helpful.
Yeah.
If somebody was like, this is okay.
Right. And another one, I mean, that brings another point too, is also the childbirth part of it too. I don't know if we talked about that in another episode, but the experience as a dad, like talk about like feeling helpless before, talk about a fully helpless like experience is freaking childbirth, you know, and like not knowing what to expect. Like that's another area I wish people in general, I think, but I feel like females tend to do a little bit better job at that still. But that's another thing that guys need to talk about. I feel like is how they experience the actual childbirth, both the whole day or whatever amount of time, plus actually seeing your wife birth a child. Wow, I definitely felt like, oh man, she's a badass. Like there were definitely those feelings I think everyone feels, but it's also like, holy shit, this was crazy.
Yeah,
this is a crazy experience. You know.
Yeah.
And I don't think guys talk about that enough.
They don't
at all.
And society doesn't talk about it. There's several things that I want to talk about with that actually. So like with my wife and I, when she was pregnant with the first, that's also funny. Like when by the second one, you're like, okay, yeah, I remember, I got this right. Like
not the new show.
But the first, we had birthing classes, and you know, I said earlier this session that you know, I read books and I learn all the things, right? And so I thought I knew what to expect. But then with both of our kids, that my wife had to have her water broke. It didn't break naturally. Yeah. And so I remember with the first one, they broke her water. She was on the hospital bed. And the baby had pooped inside of her. And so the amniotic fluid with poop came coming out. And I'm like, ew. What the hell? I literally said ew out loud. And 30 years later, my wife is reminding me of that.
You'd never live it down.
Right? So that's something that nobody prepared me for. Like I had no idea that happened.
Yeah.
And so there's that, like,
yes,
I think it would be beneficial for us to, you know, for men to talk to other men about what to expect. I mean, that's just one example. Sure. I mean, another example is when you watch a baby come out of a part of your partner that used to be for your sexual pleasure, that can change, that can alter your view of your partner. Right. Because
you may see them not as sexual being as much, or not as
because this part of you is not just for my sexual pleasure. Now it creates humans. Like, how am I supposed to make sense of that, right? And so there's that struggle as well. And then also if she's breastfeeding, that's another part of her that used to be for your pleasure that's not just solely for your pleasure anymore. And so that's a struggle that and I'm sure you've dealt with men too, that their sexual desire for their wife can change. I feel like people are never going to have kids after they listen to this episode.
They're going to be like, no, I don't want poopy water on my shoes. Get out.
And so that's another reason why we should talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like have mentors is what I mean.
Yeah.
And it is an interesting experience to go through it. Like it's a very much a learning experience, very much a struggle sometimes for how are we still going to get our needs met? How are we still going to build our relationship? Because if you don't pour into your relationship before, during, and after pregnancy, then you're just coasting, right? You're just coasting. And some people run out of energy early on after pregnancy, and some people take longer. So I'm talking about sometimes it eventually ends up in the dissolving of the relationship, right? Because there's not a pouring into the relationship that happens. And I get it. You're exhausted. You know, you haven't gotten a full night's sleep in a year or two or whatever. Yep. And so I get it. And sometimes you know, your partner hasn't taken a shower because they're caring for the baby. And so,
right. And has spit up all over them or whatever.
Yeah. Although I do know several stay-at-home dads as well. Yes. So it's not just women.
Yep.
You know, the woman has the potential and the capability of earning more than the man. And so the man chooses to stay home.
That was me and my wife.
Yeah. I know several people that do that. So
yeah, it's, I mean, I think it's just acknowledging that something's changed or whatever. Things are changing or your feelings are changing. The funny like birth story that I have was like, I'm pretty sure it was with our oldest, Levi. You know, she had the baby. This is another thing that you don't talk about, the afterwards. Like she had the baby, And then of course there was the placenta that came out. Guys don't talk about that. Another one. You're not prepared for another thing to come out. And then so everything's out, and like I don't remember where. I think they had taken the baby, something, I don't know, but my wife had like a 40-hour like childbirth, so she's not eating for that whole time, which is nuts to me. But 3 hours max.
Right.
I'm like, give me food. Give me punch you in the face. But so then finally all through, and they're like sewing her up, which is another thing you don't talk about. The vaginal tear. And they're sewing her up, and she's just like chilling, like with an Italian BMT, like a BLT, like and I'm at the bottom of the bed, seeing the guts and all that. Yes. Not guts, but all the things spilling out. And they're sewing her up, and she's just hanging out there with a BLT. And I was like, what's happening? Yeah. Like, this is crazy to me. Like, it is. How can you eat? Anyways, I'm sure Heidi will love that story. But it's just stuff like that you don't talk about. You think about baby born, cuddle baby, whatever. But there's a bunch of other stuff that happens in that experience that is important to talk about with your partner, and important to, like, how that, what was that was wild, wasn't it? Like, man, if that was crazy, or I felt helpless, or whatever. Just talking about that experience with your partner, and also in an emotional sense too,
Yeah. And that reminds me of another thing.
So many stories.
Right. Another thing I wasn't prepared for, like, because I said we went through all the birthing classes, right? And they teach you how to help your partner breathe, through the delivery, the labor pains and stuff like that. And my wife's whole personality changed. Like she got really mean. So I'm like in her face trying to, trying to get her to breathe, and she's like, "Get out of my face!" I'm like, "Who are you?" I'm sorry.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. They don't tell you that,
Nope.
I think it's like, oh, this is a beautiful experience. Like, rah!
She's like throwing the washcloth across the room because I put a cold washcloth on her head. No,
get that off of me. It's so funny. Yeah, again, and it's important to, like, guys can have, again, the tendency to just keep that in, like where does that energy go? Whether it's like you were scared in that experience with your partner, or if complications happen, for example, there's another layer that happens, like just fear, or you're like feeling helpless in that experience. Or I think guys do a good job, quote unquote, of like, okay, move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But you, like 20 minutes earlier, you were like scared shitless. Like, so we're just not going to talk about that. We're just like, move on then. Cool. Okay. I guess that's going to help. That's happens often, or it's like, okay, move on. Or this is just, and it's, in some ways it's good. Like, this is just a phase. Like, like, move on. But in a lot of ways it's not. Like, you need to acknowledge those feelings, and those thoughts and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think when scary things do happen, like, talk about those scary things. Maybe not in the moment necessarily. Right. You don't have time to do that, but later, process those feelings. I remember with our oldest, the doctor thought that he was upside down. I can never remember. I think it's supposed to be face down in a vaginal birth, so they thought he was face up. So the doctor put her whole hand inside my wife to feel like she was feeling. Because I asked her, I'm like, what are you feeling for? And she said, I can tell by the ear, like whether the baby's face up or face down. But that was super scary for us. Like, both my wife and I were terrified when she said that, because I'm like, and then she's going to have a cesarean, emergency cesarean, or like, are you going to try to rotate the baby inside of her? Because the baby was already in the birth canal when she did that. And so, but any number of, like, the blood pressure can bottom out, like anything can happen. Even a vaginal tear is super scary when you don't know whether that's going to happen.
Right.
And I mean, it's super common, but you've never had a baby before. So how do you know it's super common if nobody ever told you? And sometimes they'll nick it to help it tear. which is also, they're coming at your wife's vagina
Right,
with a
like,
scalpel. Like, that could be like, what you doing? And so there's a lot of things that can happen that are really scary, in this awesome, beautiful experience that you're having, right?
Yes.
And so to me, I mean, as a therapist, I'm always going to say, process those emotions, talk about those emotions, right? Because they're real. And, just forgetting about it and pretending like it never happened is not ever a good idea.
Not helpful. And I think, transitioning to something a little different, but similar, like, I think another part of the conversation is like fatherhood, like, and obviously that, motherhood, moms are thinking about that as well. But I think one of the big parts of the conversation is the fatherhood thing. Like, I think already there's a disconnect for dads because you haven't experienced the baby in your body and you haven't felt anything up until this process. Then the baby's born and you're like, hey, I know you're my kid intellectually, but there may not necessarily be a bond yet. And all you're doing is taking my spouse away, plus you're taking my sleep away, plus you're just shitting everywhere.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, what the heck? So I think that's another part of the piece. Like, I think intellectually, guys, I mean, I thought about you think about it, like what kind of dad I want to be and all that. But then it's different when you get in there, and it's not till I almost felt like years later that it was like, okay, I can actually start being a dad. I don't know, it's weird, or like in the way that I envisioned. And I think that's, the whole stereotype, like moms for the first couple years and then hand it off to dad, where that whole comes from. But it's just such an interesting thing. Like, the fatherhood piece of it is interesting.
It is weird. Like, for the first year, whatever, I don't know, maybe 8-10 months, that is all they do is poop, pee, scream, and eat. Like right. And so then when they're more mobile and they learn how to talk a little bit, and for me, they were more fun at that age. Like, that's when I started having fun with my kids. But it's still confusing and overwhelming, and there's a lot of things that we don't know, like as new fathers, like how to be there for our partner, how to support them, because we didn't carry the kid for 9 months like our wives did. And so we can feel left out, and we can feel kind of pushed to the side, right? And so that's, again, something that could be helped by talking about it ahead of time, figuring out how can I, as the dad, feel like I'm bonding with my child as well. Maternity leave is another thing. Often women have much longer at home.
Right. And it's often frowned upon almost for guys to take more than a week or 2 weeks or whatever, for sure. Like, people give them shit like, a month? Oh, well, you're just not going to work?
Right.
It's crazy.
But it's, you do have, because you mentioned, like, I feel like fathers, we have to make up ground because the wife has been bonding with this child in utero, right? And so, because there's talk that, like, the kid can hear the mother's voice because it's like the vibrations are all through, you know what I mean? Like, and so I've seen videos of, like, the dads getting down and talking right on the tummy too, but, which is good. But fathers are already at a deficit for the bonding part of that. And so we need to make up for that. Can we, pump some breast milk and have dad feed the baby through a bottle? I know parents have weird feelings about that when they're breastfeeding.
One of those episodes,
right?
You don't have to talk about that in depth.
But if it's not if it's not pumping and bottle feeding the breast milk, then find another way to bond with your baby, right? Like, it's because that's important, because then when we don't bond with our baby and then we notice that lack of bonding, then you're trying to make up for a deficit that you could have or should have planned for all along. So you have to make up even more ground then, right? So it is important that dads be involved in that process, and also building the relationship too. I think there's a lot going on, right? So you have to take care of your partner, you have to take care of your baby, you have to take care of yourself, right? And get your needs met, because it's unhealthy to not get your needs met, because then you're going to get them met in another way that may not be as healthy.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think for me, the best thing that can happen, and it was hard, like I stayed home part of the time. It was like part-time. I think like I would work 2 days a week early on. And then so I was home 3 days with our oldest, and then with both of them later on. And that for me was probably the best thing that could happen to me, like being able to bond with them and really understand, like, this is what it takes to, I remember, I can't exactly remember what it was, but I remember routine. Sometimes Heidi would, we had to navigate, like, okay, this looks different when I take care of the kids. Like, they're not as clean. The house is not as clean. You know what I mean? Like, I had to like figure it out, and like, and that I knew exactly what entailed to like take care of the baby, change them all the time, make sure later on, make sure they have snacks or whatever. Like, even those little things, I think that was the best that could happen for me, because it gave me an insight into like, oh yeah, I'm there too. Like, and then also the confidence of like, I can do it as well. Yep. I can take the baby with me somewhere and I'll be fine. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the best that could have happened to me. And I think the overall thing is like, don't just check out in those early years. I mean, most good dads won't, but it's valuable ground laying, like you said, the catching up that you're putting in early on, for then later when it is the fun times and you can play sports with them and teach them sport or wrestle or whatever. You've already created that bond before, and you've put the front end work to that too. You know what I mean? Not to say it's gonna suck if you don't, but it really is better if you do.
Yeah, you're building the relationship, right? And you can't go wrong with building a relationship. So
definitely. Yeah. What would be some tips that you would have as we start to wrap this up a little? But what would be some tips you have for expectant guys, expectant fathers, any throughout any point in time or whatever? What are some tips you got for our guys that are listening?
Oh, a lot. Probably.
We already said a lot, but
yeah. I think communication. I think it all comes down to communication. Communicate with your partner, communicate with your doctor, communicate with other fathers. It's very confusing, and it can be overwhelming, right? And you don't know what you don't know, right? Until you experience it, and then you know.
Yep.
And so, like, everything is a crisis at the beginning, right? Like, my baby sneezed. Is that okay? Right. And so, I think communication is the biggest tip, probably. And then find a way. I know it's difficult, but find a way to do stuff with your partner, to keep building that relationship. Yeah. I think those are the two biggest tips.
Huge, for sure. Yeah. And for me, I would say having a support system. I think, it's just crazy when I reflect back. It's both the most beautiful time of my life, but also in some ways individually, like the worst time, like for my mental health and for like other areas of my struggle in life. Like, it was equally both. It was a wild time, how so extreme it was. And I think it was easy to just, keep going. And I mean, just put the blinders on, ultimately it ended up working out. Not because I put the blinders on though, but if I were to reach out more, or if there was more people around at that time, I'd be like, hey, this is rough. Like, are you having the same rough time as I'm having? Like, or like what? Like, I think that would have for sure made my experience better. So it's like reaching out as hard as it can be, or having a support system that you can talk to, that you can lean on, like outside of your partner, because she's doing her thing, and obviously trying to stay connected, but in the emotional, mental health part of it, like seeking out ways to get that need fulfilled throughout that time. You know, I think that would have been huge. But I mean, we're here now, and it worked out, but but man, it was rough. Jeez, it was rough. Gotta love them.
It is. It's rough. It's for sure.
Insane, for sure. Cool. Any other thoughts for our guys? Please have babies if it's okay. Yes, it'll be fine.
I feel like we tried to talk you out of it.
Like talk them off of a ledge.
But it's all things that we wish that we knew when we were there, right?
Exactly.
In that position.
Exactly.
But it's, reach out for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, if we're always down to take viewer questions, whether it's about past episodes, but for sure expectant dads, like we'd love to hear your questions and concerns and comments, and maybe we'll cover more in depth in the future or other concerns about expectant dads. Like, feel free to hit us up, check us out on all our socials, Wet Dreamz Podcast with a Z, at all socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all that stuff. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us.
The Wet Dreamz Podcast and any content posted is intended for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes only. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining a medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.